guess I had just had I had a similar type of epiphany moment where I was just like, at our last sales meeting doing this presentation, and they were telling me, I listened to one of them and it was like, oh, this is the Theta AR jacket, and this is the Theta SL jacket, and the Theta XK jacket, and the Theta whatever. And I was like, God, these are all the same jacket. Are you kidding me, right? I just kind of I was like, yeah, I think it's time, I'm done. Basically quit the next day, and that was it. And then I remember having the conversation with TJ, and I'm like, so I kind of quit my job. And he's like, you did what? And I'm like, so we better do this thing.
Totally. I was still talking about this idea, and I was like putting this plan together, and I'm like, hey guys, I think that this could work. And I was talking to both Calum and Ian about it at that point, and going like, oh, I think we should do this. And then Ian just came home one day and said like, so are we doing this thing? Because I just quit. And I was like, this is not the sequence you're supposed to follow, man. You're breaking the rules before we've even gotten started.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built. Getting into the cycling apparel business could now be one of the lowest barrier to entry segments in the industry. These days, anyone with an Instagram account and some design ability can directly access factories in Italy or China and create a clothing brand. And it's incredibly tough to cut through in this crowded market. That's not to say some don't break through and create legitimate and worthy businesses this way. I know firsthand a few who have. And this low barrier to entry has enabled some wonderful brands to get started and flourish. But because of this, it's a crowded market, and it's tough to discern who are doing great work and innovating and who are just pumping out disposable fashion. Every once in a while, however, a new brand comes along with people from a track record of success, expertise, and you just know they'll be around for the long haul. From the moment I first discovered 7 Mesh a few years ago, I knew this was one of those brands in its infancy. For those who aren't familiar, 7 Mesh are an apparel brand based in Squamish, Canada, and they make some top-level cycling clothing for the demands of mountain biking, gravel, and road. The 3 founders, Tyler Jordan, you'll hear him being referred to as TJ throughout this episode, Ian Martin and Calum Davidson aren't 3 random people who got together to do a passion project, however. They were 3 early staff members and integral to the success of outdoor clothing juggernaut Arcteryx. Tyler was the CEO, Ian was VP of product, and Calum was the head of operations, and all 3 are nuts for cycling. They were all great friends in their early days at Arcteryx, were having fun, pushing boundaries, and getting stuff done. But as the saying goes, all good things come to an end. And as the 3 oversaw tremendous growth in the business, they gave everything up to go off on their own direction and create something new from scratch. To tell the story of 7 Mesh, we need to get to know Tyler, Calum, and Ian in the early days of Arcteryx. Tyler, what's your first memory of when you met Ian, when Ian came into Arcteryx and you were already there?
Well, it was kind of an interesting story because Ian was hell-bent on becoming part of the Arcteryx team and ended up persevering and finding a backdoor way in through a sub-department of a sub-department, really angling for the long-term role we wanted, which was a true product design job. And so when I first met Ian, I just got to know him as just a guy with just incredible perseverance and drive who knew what he wanted to get a little bit and went out and after it. And so it was quite impressive in that regard, and also quite annoying in the sense of like, dude, we just don't have that position available for you yet, but it'll come. And it did.
What were you doing, Ian, to get the job of your dreams or get into the company of your dreams?
Well, I just finished university. My wife and I were building like cedar strip sea kayaks, like in our father-in-law's basement, which was, not fun, but not really a business. So again, business plan, I should think about that. And so I was looking for, something creative, and I had this sort of opportunity to do a master's program, working on avalanche research. And I decided, no, I'm going to do more of a design pursuit. And Calum at the time was working at Arcteryx in the finance department. And I said, well, what's available there? Do you have any jobs there available? And kind of thing. And knew, I had come from a textile background. My mom was a textile artist and had, I'd been sewing things since I was a kid, building products and all kinds of different things. creative jack of all trades, for lack of a better term. And then Callum I gave him a bunch of copies of my resume, and he threw them around at a bunch of different people, and they said, "We've got this job we'd like you to do. It's sort of like this research internship thing." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds pretty good. Sounds like a good, foot in the door or whatever." And they're like, "Oh, but we can't pay you." I'm like, "Well, I'm kind of looking for a job that pays." So I ended up finding this government program, actually, through the Industrial Research Council, and they ended up paying half my salary, and I convinced Arcteryx to pay the other half, and worked in this project for 6 months, or maybe it was a little longer, and totally, totally hated it. It was like I was literally locked in a closet. No, like literally my office was a closet. And I learned a lot about the business and what people were doing and how they were doing it, but it was like, glorified data entry.
So yeah, I knew Ian from Newfoundland. We've known each other for a long time. And when he and his wife moved out to Vancouver, I had just started at Arcteryx, and the office was really small. And Ian's right that he did literally work in the cloakroom at the front of the office, because there was just literally physically no other space for desk. But I got like 10 copies of his resume and wrote little notes at the top, like "call back" or "interesting" and stuff like that, and just flipped them into different people's inboxes, like halfway through a stack of other paper all over the desks. And someone in marketing called him back for that mapping project that he started on.
And Callum, how did you get into Arcteryx?
I had worked there. Ian and I worked both together at a climbing gym in St. John's that a friend of ours, their family ran. And so I knew of Arcteryx from climbing harnesses and backpacks. And I moved out to Vancouver with my family when I was 18, just after high school, and walked in the front door one day and asked, if I could have a job. And the person there was like, "Well, what do you do?" And I was 18 and had basically no skills. So I said, "Anything." And they actually, the timing was good. They had got like a pallet of returns from the US warehouse the day before. So the person was like, "Hold on one second," and came back and was like, "Yep, follow me." And I started working there that afternoon. And then about 2 weeks later, someone came to me and was like, "Hey, Cal, we need your last name and your social insurance number and that kind of thing for his payday." And I worked there for a little while, like in the shipping department for about 6 months. And then that was in 99. And then left and spent a ski season in Whistler, went to university for a bit, and then came back in 2002 and started working there in like an entry-level accounting position, because that's what I was doing in university.
Right. And Tyler, you have pretty humble beginnings at Arcteryx as well, and you were right. What am I correct in like saying employee number 4?
I was a 4th office guy, but there was a few other people there. So Ian was the one who was determined to find his way in. I think Calum and I kind of blundered our way into our jobs a little bit and kind of found a career path out of it. So I graduated university. I'm a biologist by training. I had a scholarship to do my master's, but I didn't really want to do it. So I made the time-honored decision to go travel for a year. So I rode bikes and climbed rocks and had fun. And then when I ran out of money, I figured if I'm going to live somewhere in Canada, I might as well move to Vancouver because it's mildest there and I can climb most of the year. So I moved to Vancouver with no money, no plan, no future in the works. And while I was at a climbing gym a couple months later, I noticed a handwritten ad on the wall. And it was written by the guy who created the Arcteryx brand, a guy named Jeremy Gard. And it's, was this handwritten note that said, "We're looking for an administrator." And I called from this is pre-cell phone days. So I called from the phone at the gym on a Friday afternoon. And they said, "Well, we think we've already filled the position, but if you come in on Monday, it'd be nice to say hi." And I went in on Monday, and a 15-minute interview turned into a 2-hour conversation. And that, that's changed my whole career, because I ended up starting there as administrator, which basically meant the guy who does a little bit of everything, or whatever needs to be done. And then just grew with the business from there. So there were the 2 partners that ran the business, and product designer, and then myself in the office. And they had a cool little factory with about a dozen sewing operators in it. And it was just a climbing harness business at that time.
From the outside, and from my limited knowledge, Arcteryx it feels like you guys were just crushing it. Did it feel like that from the inside, Tyler, working in there, seeing where it came from and where it was?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that definitely the sense within Arcteryx was it was a brand with very strong personality within the company. The people that succeeded at Arcteryx were people that were headstrong, that were willing to do what it took, that worked and played super hard. that could flourish in a very unstructured environment. We weren't very good at planning, organizing, execution, process development. We were too busy kind of moving from one thing to the next. And so it was from the outside, the brand didn't make that many mistakes and was very pristine and very protected and very sophisticated. And on the inside, it was a bit of a maelstrom the whole time of keeping the machine going. And like I always tell people, it's like somebody needs to write a book about that company one day, because some of the stuff that went on to get it from A to H or whatever it is on the journey now, as the brand continues to grow and mature. I mean, it was a wild, wild ride for sure.
I think, there's only one analogy I can use to describe that. And it felt like that very much at Arcteryx. It was, and then going back to, I'm not much of a Trekkie fan, but, the Star Trek reference, which is like, it was a Klingon warbird, it was feared by all in the galaxy, but inside people were like roasting pigs on spits. It was like a total shit show. But it was, really interesting. It made a really great place for people to, find interesting ways and different ways of doing things and be able to just go for it. And, that's Calum's worst fear. That's an operational nightmare, which it was to a certain degree, but that's also what made it so great. So, it's finding that balance along the way that makes great products. So
yeah, it was magic. Like people in there, you were, like TJ said, people either were quickly realized that was a good environment for them and they were going to thrive and just love it, or it was not for them and they couldn't get past the lack of process or specific kind of instruction on things. Like it was like hundreds of entrepreneurs all kind of pushing for the same direction. Yeah, I mean, like Ian was saying, I went from like a kind of accounting role into production planning and working with our scheduling at our factory, then working with setting up the, as our demand was growing, trying to like keep up with that from a capacity point of view and moving manufacturing to Asia, and spent a lot of time developing factories in Asia and relationships there. And it was like kind of an operational nightmare, but there was one goal. You're always just chasing that demand. So we're just like, how do we make more? How do we make more? And how do we put in the right amount of process so that we can come through to our customers and deliver pre-seasons and be a good partner for the people that are buying Arcteryx. And at the same time, the culture was so clear that like, quality and product were paramount. And so there's lots of things you're like, oh yeah, we could, if we did that, it would improve the supply chain, but the product wouldn't be as good. And everyone's like, oh, okay, well then we're not going to do that. So it was the mandate inside was really clear. How you got there was less clear. But it was, it was just magic. It was great.
I imagine this being pretty much all of your first jobs into your career, you wouldn't have known any different. But did it feel quite normal to you, or did you ever think like, is this how it's supposed to be?
No, it was so fucked up.
The one thing I think Arcteryx really benefited from was the naivete of a bunch of us that were doing a bunch of the heavy lifting. And it wasn't like there was three of us. Like Calum was saying, it was like a company full of entrepreneurs, none of which knew what they were supposed to be doing, but knew what needed to get done at the end of the day. And so what I found is like through formalized training, you kind of learn like, here's the way these problems are approached and here's what a solution is. And the kind of the business plan we were joking about earlier kind of ties into that. It's like, well, here's how an accountant would do it. And here's how you do a forecast. And here's how you do it. Like, we didn't have the benefit of any of that. So we just didn't know when to stop. So when we wanted to investigate, oh my God, how are we going to build this product more cost effectively so we don't go bankrupt? We just dove in and immersed ourselves to a level that we self-taught ourselves, how to fly the Klingon warbird without an instruction manual. And so not knowing that there was a finish line or an acceptable kind of way to execute, we often went beyond that.
Tyler, in 2005, you became CEO, and that coincides with the time when Amory Sports purchased the company. What was there a management shuffle that brought you to that position? Was it something that you had your sights set on and wanted to work towards that? How did that come about?
I would say that there was a process in place, and that timing is coincidental more than anything else. So Arcteryx was purchased by Adidas Solomon in 2002. And at that time, the next person to take over as CEO was a friend of ours named Tom Herbst. And Tom Herbst was had worked for Arcteryx for a number of years in a consulting role and in a full-time role. He was one of the people that helped build Mountain Equipment Co-op in Canada, which is many people will know, and then went on to kind of contribute to Arcteryx. And I think at the time the deal was done, we were purchased by Adidas Solomon. The deal was really done with Solomon. And so Jean-Luc Diard, who's the CEO of Solomon, believed in the vision, believed in what we're trying to do, and wanted to line up. Solomon happened to be owned by Adidas at the time, so they wrote the check. But Jean-Luc had a kind of a really good understanding of the outdoor industry, the ski industry, bike industry. He was kind of a well-rounded guy, and he just thought that there'd be a lot of places that he could go with Arcteryx. With kind of our close-knit group at the top of the company that were running the company, kind of the discussion at that time was really like that I was likely the next person in line to, really be the long-term next leader of the company. But that maybe I was a bit too young, maybe the optics aren't right, maybe I wasn't quite ready yet for that. So, when you think that was 2002 and I was 32 years old or something, then I'd been there for a long time, but I was still pretty green in terms of having a resume that showed, hey, this guy's ready to run a company that we're going to try to grow from, 25 to 250 million or whatever. And so Tom agreed to step into that role kind of with a 2 to 3 year time frame in mind. And everybody knew about that. Everybody knew and agreed that plan made a lot of sense. And so Tom ran the business and kind of helped stabilize things through that transition and help, normalize things a little bit and put his stamp on how things were run. And in that time, I got to work towards making sure that the Solomon team, that Jean-Luc had confidence that I was, ready to take that over. And so I kind of took that over, more or less as scheduled in February of 2002. And then it was later that spring that Amer Sports transitioned into the picture. So Adidas sold the Solomon group of brands to Amer Sports, but Amer was very much a holding company that owned several brands, but each brand was kind of run semi-independently with a semi-integrated sales force. And so it didn't have a lot of direct impact on Arcteryx for a while still. So everything was, I would say it was reasonably seamless through that period.
It feels like you guys are all really good friends and everything, and that probably goes back many, many years. Calum and Ian, was the hierarchy that, a C-level, position that Tyler got, did that impede on any friendship, or did it make things different? Could you go into his desk or into his office and put your feet on his desk?
Yeah, no, I knew TJ from Arcteryx, from when I was there in 99 when he was running kind of finance and operations. It was a big company, but it was quite not really flat from a hierarchy point of view, but it was flat from a social hierarchy point of view. So, while there was reporting structures and that kind of thing, nobody was like afraid to bump into TJ in the hallway or anything like that. It was everyone at a social level, everyone was kind of on the same page. TJ was always my boss's boss at Arcteryx, right? So, but then at the same time as Ian first moved into Squamish, where TJ had lived for a while and commuting down, we spent a lot of time carpooling from Squamish, where we all lived, to Arcteryx. And so that definitely broke down any kind of business hierarchy. We talked shop a little bit, but it was a lot of just like general life talk and what would you say, like friend colleague talk more so than like, I'm in the carpool with my boss's boss, I better not say anything stupid, We
did have a rule, and it was. Does anybody remember what the rule was?
Yeah, whatever happens in the carpool stays in the carpool.
Yeah.
And it was also, like Arcteryx was a pretty interesting company. I mean, for a long time there, we had moved from the location where we had the factory, which we called Manor Street. We moved over to a different location, and there was this blank space out back. And it was just like a, piece of asphalt or whatever. And there was a whole bunch of shipping pallets kicking around, from the warehouse there. So we actually built a hockey rink out back, and it became this phenomenal thing. Someone found some old Lexan, from making parts at the factory or whatever it was. We built boards. And then all of a sudden we had this email, and it was like literally every day at like 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30, everyone would like look up. And someone would be like, and it was hockey@arcteryx.com or whatever, and people would like just write in game on. And everyone would just grab a stick, get up out of their desk, walk outside, and we'd have this like outrageous street hockey games. like, and full, like, I mean, it was someone bleeding in every game. It was outrageous. And so I even remember the first couple of weeks we had this impromptu games that I don't even know how they started, to be honest. Everyone would come home and they'd be like, the next day no one could walk. So you'd all be walking around the office like limping because you're like, I played street hockey since I was a kid, but man, it's pretty full on, like, and some of my fondest memories actually working at Arcteryx or playing street hockey. We used to have a blast playing street hockey, and then we'd all pile into the car and drive back to Squamish from the city, and life was good.
Calum, what's your perspective on how that helped your career or impacted your career?
On my side, in the part of the business I worked in, I think there's no doubt the growth offered me opportunities that a company growing 2 or 5% or something like that just wouldn't have had. It was so exciting for me that like TJ said, when you're playing hockey, people don't want to go home because they want to watch the game even if they're not playing. Like what was happening at Arcteryx was so exciting. You didn't think, oh man, I have to work overtime tonight. You're like, well, there's no way I'm going home because I'm going to miss what's happening. And that kind of drive to keep solving problems, along with kind of maybe more of a track record of having solved them, and the growth of the company definitely for sure helped me in my career. Just actually, as I was leaving in 2013, someone found a copy of the resume I'd been hired into accounting with, and we were kind of laughing. We're like, "Oh, that guy would never get a job here today." But it was mainly true and partially made up or whatever. But it was it kind of did point to like there was a period of opportunity there, that whether it's luck or clairvoyance or whatever, that I recognized that was a magic place to be. And instead of finishing my degree, I dropped out and worked at Arcteryx full time. But then that you do kind of go from I was like accounts payable when I was hired, and then you see opportunities. Okay, in raw material product costing, and are we making sure that the bill of material adds up? Okay, so how can I help on that? And then you see that gets you more involved with the factory. Okay, so how can we improve that? How can we improve that? And just kind of continues to have that curious attitude. So then you go and you're planning production, and then it's clear that that's working, and you need more manpower. So then a couple of years later, you haven't really thought about it, but then you're like, oh, now I'm planning manager, and there's a bunch of other people that are planning production and under my guidance, and you just kind of keep going. I have a good bad habit or good habit of like going to the stuff that no one else wants to do as well, which is a great trait in operations. So when someone's like talking about customs compliance or tariff,
we love that guy. We love that guy.
So good.
The kind of most, reading the tariff schedule from another country to make sure that the products are going in at the right duty rate and all that kind of stuff. And things like that, that stand out. I'm like, oh, if, no one else is going to want to do that. Okay, I can own that. So I'd go after those kind of things.
You should see this guy with a creak in his bottom bracket. I mean, it's like the worst, like it's like horrible.
And, like TJ mentioned before, those kind of headstrong people survive when there's a decision to be made and everyone's going, oh, whose decision is this? Sometimes you just say, oh, this is my decision. And if you have a good vision for it, if you're right, you have a vision, you say, oh, here's what we're doing. And this is actually my decision. It's part of my position. And people go, oh, okay. And off you go. And then you're like, oh, now I'm in charge of that. So there is definitely opportunities there that presented themselves if you were willing to work and go after it. The Arcteryx also had a really, really strong culture of promoting from within. So when there were big hires to make, often, the first people to get a crack at it were internal staff. So there's a culture there of rewarding people who are working hard and who are getting results. It's great.
It's either that or things ran so differently internally that the thought of hiring someone from outside, you're like, well, they just can't do that job because it's so messed up internally.
We did interview a guy who'd previously worked at like a Toyota. He'd been like a production planner from like a Toyota car factory in Ontario, and he was like a 5S like a real lean manufacturing knowledgeable guy, and we were like, oh, that guy's really good. I don't know if that's going to work for us right now.
We'd eat him alive.
Yeah, exactly.
This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support. In 2012, Tyler made the unexpected move to leave Arcteryx after 19 years and taking it to a $250 million a year business. From all accounts, it was his decision to leave. He wasn't forced out or anything like that. He had it good, so to speak. He was at the very top leading a successful outdoors business, was probably getting paid very well, and was still relatively young.
There are so many factors that were involved in my decision that I feel like anytime I describe it, I could be committing a little bit of revisionist history. I'd been at Arcteryx then for, I guess, 18 years, and the last 8 as the CEO, and learned a tremendous amount growing up with that business. And like I said, I think 30% of my DNA is now Arcteryx DNA, and vice versa. So it's something that will always be part of me. And at the time, I thought I would probably work there forever. And I always told everyone, I'm like, I'm either gonna get fired or I'm gonna die, because otherwise there's no way I'm leaving. And that changed at one point. And so why that changed was kind of ultimately, in a way, I became a casualty of our own success. And when Amer Sports bought the Solomon Group of Brands, they had specific goals in mind when they did that. And Arcteryx was not even on their radar. And Arcteryx was still a small business within the portfolio at that time. They didn't know much about it. They didn't know much about apparel. As the industry evolved and matured and Arcteryx continued to grow, we became quite an important brand in their portfolio. And we're growing really fast. We're a very profitable business. We're doing really well. And that got us on the radar, and it became it got more and more of the attention of the group in terms of how to build a plan going forward. I think that for me, what that did is it changed it from my role at the top of the company as the company got bigger, became more and more embedded in interacting and working with people at Amer Sports and people at the top of the company that were building that global plan. And there's some great people there and some great relationships and a lot of fun, but it meant a lot of travel, a lot of meeting rooms, a lot of PowerPoint presentations. And I started to feel a lot more like I was talking about what Arcteryx should be doing as opposed to actually doing it. And the overall feeling was that I was growing out of being an Arcteryx person to becoming an Amer Sports person. That's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that, except it wasn't what had gotten me excited for the 17 years before that 18th year. And as I kind of realized that my role was going to change, that things were going to change, the brand was going to change, everything was going to continue to evolve, and I wasn't going to be able to play as hands-on a role working with the teams and building the business, it kind of became less attractive. And I thought, well, I've spent 18 years building something or helping build something, that to me was really, really special and really, really beautiful. And I wanted to leave on that high note rather than kind of evolve into an executive position where I wasn't really controlling the brand, and the brand would change into something that wasn't quite my personal vision for where it should go, that kind of thing. And ultimately decided I had to make a change. And so it was a very, very tough decision. But I thought, you know what, I'd rather leave super proud of everything we created and let the company take the next step on its journey than find like I'm losing control of what we'd worked towards for 18 years and kind of watch a bit of a decline in that vision and then hand it off to somebody else years later, and very tough choice to make.
Were you unhappy?
I was stressed for sure, but I mean, we'd been stressed for 18 years, so that was nothing new. It was a time by the way. I was conflicted. Unhappy is the wrong word. Conflicted is more of the right word. Where I wanted to help build Arcteryx. I didn't want to talk about building Arcteryx, and that was the dichotomy I found myself stuck within. And then ultimately, when I couldn't manage that dichotomy anymore, and the option of just quietly running Arcteryx was not really on the map. I felt like I just needed to go do something different because that's, I felt like I'd made a promise to what I was trying to do. And if I couldn't live up to that 100%, then I needed to own up to that and make a change. And that's what I did.
Ian or Calum, did you see this coming? Did you notice the change in Tyler at all?
We I think you could pick up on we saw him less and less in the carpool. And so we're like, man, I haven't given you a ride in a long time. What's going on? He's like, oh, I've been, you realize the amount of travel and the kind of things that were occupying his brain. You could tell, that the Arcteryx was in that, we're going from being a mid-sized company to being a big company. And that brings a different level of stress and a different type of stress. So we were all, obviously disappointed. There was like a period of grieving for the company when TJ left. I shouldn't say it was, I was surprised, but it wasn't totally unexpected, maybe.
Yeah, I think, yeah. I mean, I can actually remember because I just hired a guy, and the guy had like literally started that day, and I had like moved his whole family to like come work for us and this whole thing. I remember TJ went around and like he went around and found all the people that he had personal connections with, or we were friends and whatever. And he like sat everyone down individually in the conference room, each one individually, and told us. And I can still remember, which is that you would have had to talk to a lot of people that day. And he told me, and as soon as he told me, I'm like, God, this guy's first day is today, and I'm gonna have to like. I mean, I was surprised. I wasn't surprised, but I was like, God, it's like this guy just moved here. I just sold him on everything. Like, he drank the Kool-Aid, and TJ's quitting. Are you kidding me? But, I totally got it. I mean, we're all feeling, I think all of us were feeling the same pressures, I described it earlier, that you walk around with your laptop talking about what we're going to make versus making it. And fundamentally, you're a product driven company, and you're fundamentally, the guys at Amer Sports, I mean, they just didn't understand it at all. They didn't understand where the growth was coming from. They didn't understand where the numbers were coming from. Lots of good people there who did get it, but fundamentally it was, and I didn't interact with that part of the business, so I'm comfortable saying it, but it was clear that there was a lack of understanding of what was so special.
Tyler, was it tough not to talk about, in these carpool, chats and stuff, and really trying to keep this to yourself, or were you able to confide in how you felt at the time?
Yeah, I think I shared little bits with my friends, so they knew little bits what was going on. But I was always, I always want to be very respectful. Like I may be too soft for a guy that is supposed to run a business, and I was very much cognizant of and respectful of all the people involved. So it's kind of thing where I wouldn't speak out of school, and I'd, make sure that things were handled in an appropriate way. And I was ultimately trying to solve problems, not create problems, with my decision to leave. And so I wasn't trying to fire anybody up. I wasn't trying to rally the troops that the company should be doing something different. There wasn't a big conflict like that. There was just more my sense of I wanted Arcteryx to stand for the same values in 100 years that it stood for when we started. And that was always what we talked about in company meetings. It's like, we're going to build a 100-year brand. When we're all dead and gone, this company will stand for the same things that it does today. And that doesn't stop a company from evolving. It doesn't stop the brand from growing. It doesn't stop a company from getting really big. It just means are the underpinnings of what's driving this the same? And are all these people in the room, are all the people on the bus, are they all motivated with the same goals in mind? Are we all trying to accomplish the same thing? I felt like I was in a situation where I couldn't guarantee that any further. So again, it's not like there was anything cataclysmic going on, or that there's a massive conflict over any one thing. It was the sense of like, if I'm supposed to be driving this bus and I feel like I don't have my eye on the road, then should I be driving this bus right now? And I was getting pulled in a lot of different directions as part of the global organization, and wasn't able to find a way myself, or wasn't able to find a solution that gave me the confidence that I could do the job as leadership that team deserved. And like, I think you've heard us speak enough to know, like, we believe there's a lot of great brands out there, and I don't want to take away from any of those stories, but it's like, I don't, what happened at Arcteryx, I consider myself extremely fortunate to have been a part of it. As hard as it was, and as scary as it was at times, and as difficult as it was at times, it was an amazing, amazing place. And if I felt like I couldn't adequately protect that, then I didn't want to be the guy that wasn't doing a good enough job. And so that's what drove my decision.
Had 7Mesh, or the concept of building a cycling clothing brand, at all entered your mind?
Yeah, I think when I quit, I mean, I knew how hard we worked at Arcteryx when it was really small. And so when I quit, I had ideas that I might start another business, but I wasn't sure. So I was true to my word with Arcteryx that I never looked for another job and never had a safety net or anything. When I decided I needed to go, that was it. I quit and I was out the door. And so I took a little bit of time off. I'd worked really hard and I had two relatively young kids. I wanted to spend some catch up time with them. And so I did that thinking about, do I really want to start a business? And when it came to the cycling side of it, it was kind of a natural area for us because I was a passionate rider. Calum and Ian and I were, many of the people, everybody at Arcteryx is a multi-sport athlete. So originally it was a climbing company, but the whole place is full of climbers, backcountry skiers, mountain bikers, road bikers, you name it. Cycling was something many of us were really passionate about. And we kind of always lamented for a long time that we didn't feel like the gear in cycling had progressed as much as the gear in outdoor. So, Arcteryx, and, just have to forgive us for saying this, but Arcteryx was, largely responsible for a revolution in the quality of backcountry apparel. And, there had been various innovations for a while, and then things had kind of not progressed for a bit. And Arcteryx really kind of changed the name of the game in terms of how those products were put together. That cascaded and snowballed out of outdoor into all kinds of different activities. And cycling, I think partly because cycling is such a sport that is so rooted in tradition, right? It's like, well, if Eddie Merckx can put a newspaper inside his jersey and ride down the hill and that's good enough for him, then that's good enough for me. And so, we were all these, multi-sport athletes that had access to some of the most advanced construction technologies in the world and the best apparel in the world. And we're helping build this stuff. And then when we go riding, we'd ride in cycling gear and we were always disappointed by it. And so part of the feeling when I quit was like, we'd always talked about somebody needs to go do some better, like some really great backcountry, outdoor, protective, advanced technology, comfortable, lighter, better, stronger, more durable apparel. And eventually it was like, well, we keep complaining about it, so maybe we should be the ones that go do it. And so it kind of pulled together some conversations I'd had with Ian and with Calum, with lots of other people over time that like, hey, it's like, if this is something really passionate about and this is the activity that we're all doing, then why don't we go solve some more problems together?
I had a similar type of epiphany moment where I was just like, at our last sales meeting doing this presentation, and they were telling me, I listened to one of them and it was like, oh, this is the Theta AR jacket, and this is the Theta SL jacket, and the Theta XK jacket, and the Theta whatever. And I was like, God, these are all the same jacket. Like, you're kidding me, right? Like, these are literally like, they're the same jacket. And I just kind of I was like, yeah, I think it's time, I'm done. And I literally the next day was like, talked to my boss and kind of told him what it was up. And he's like, oh man, well, you can't do that. And then he's like, and then basically quit the next day. And that was it. And then I remember having the conversation with TJ, and I'm like, so I kind of quit my job. And he's like, you did what? And I'm like, so we better do this thing.
Totally. I was still talking about this idea, and I was like putting this plan together, and I'm like, hey guys, I think that, like, this could work. And I was talking to both Calum and Ian about it at that point and going like, oh, I think we should do this. And then he just came home one day and said like, so are we doing this thing? Cause I just quit. And I was like, this is not the sequence you're supposed to follow, man. You're breaking the rules before we've even gotten started. And away we went.
And Calum, when did you come on board to these conversations? Was this something that was also you were involved with at the start, or did you start?
I'm maybe a little bit more structured in my thought processes and a little more pensive about it than you. And I left about a month later. Really, for me, it was a terrible time to leave Arcteryx. It was. We were absolutely killing it on all of the kind of supply chain metrics. We were delivering well. I built an incredible team. I was really enjoying my work there.
We ruined his life, Wade. We ruined his life.
Much, these guys ruined my life. Everything, all the things all the operational things you dream about doing, like, oh, if we could improve that by 1%. And, when you're small, that 1% doesn't matter. When you get to be 250, 300 million, oh, we could improve this by 1%. All of a sudden, all those little tweaks start to add up to real numbers. And you could measure all these improvements you're making. And we're getting really data driven and working to KPIs and metrics. I mean, it was like, supply chain wonderland. It was getting really good. But I was spending a lot more time, like a lot of people there, interfacing with shared services through Amber Sports, and everyone there also trying to do the right thing, but just doing it in a different way. And so you start thinking about like, okay, is this? Am I going to be happy changing the approach? Like, can I evolve with this? And is that what I want to do? And I was inspired a little bit as well by my partner, who just decided to go back to university and start a second career as a nurse. And kind of think, well, if you're gonna go bankrupt, you should do it early in life so you have time to recover.
Day one, you guys all quit your jobs. You say, we're doing 7-mesh. You open your computers, there's nothing on it. What do you do? Where do you start building an apparel company? What was you guys' first move into that?
Well, it was funny. I'll speak up first and say, like, the amazing thing was, like, other than the people we knew around the world, we really started from scratch because we thought, frankly, we thought the three of us all leaving Arcteryx over the course of a year and then starting another business that was in technical apparel was the kind of thing that could attract attention from Amber Sports that we didn't want. So we knew we just wanted to make sure we were fully buttoned up, that, nobody even pulled out a tray of business cards from their Arcteryx days or anything like that to make sure we started from scratch. So we started literally making phone calls to get the thing started. And like, I remember calling 1-800-GO-FedEx and saying, hey, I haven't done this in like 15 years. How do I set up a FedEx account? And Ian, reaching out to old raw materials vendors and saying, hey, we're starting a new thing here. We need to get going. So, we started on a picnic table in my backyard and Calum's living room and Ian's kitchen table. And we started putting the building blocks together of what do you need to build an apparel brand? And I will say right off the bat to any of the entrepreneurs out there, like, building a business, we found it to be really, really, really hard. And that's with the three of us having, combined 40 or 50 years of experience in technical apparel. And it gives you just an absolute newfound appreciation for people that start absolutely from scratch, because at least we had people that knew us. And so we could phone people and say, hey, can you send us your price list? And they at least know who we are and we'll take the phone call. And that gave us a head up. But other than that, it was starting from scratch.
Well, we say probably, I would say once a year, the three of us probably remark in some regard of like, can you imagine if you were starting a business in your garage with no prior experience and you were just like going to do it? Like, I'm like, I can't even imagine that. That's like the scariest thing in the whole world. Like, we had a lot of experience and it's still full on.
We, from the three of us driving around town, Squamish was a bit of a different place then too. We're like, okay, once we kind of realized that we weren't going to be able to build it for too long at a kitchen table, we were like, is there actually any decent like little office space we can get in town, that kind of thing. But having had careers, and I think, like to TJ's point before, if in your career you have done your best to do the right thing, then sometimes doing the right thing is good for someone else's business. Sometimes it's bad for someone else's business, but hopefully at least they respect your position on it. So I think the three of us had built up a good amount of like kind of favor equity or goodwill in the industry. It's actually a really small industry when you get to the bottom of it. There's like a dozen good factories that build all the nice outerwear in the world. It's really not that, if you've been bad in your career, you can't really hide anywhere. So we're lucky that we have a lot of good, people we'd work with that were personal friends, and we pulled in a lot of support from people. And there was a lot of people who were kind of rooting for us, and wanted to help if they could.
Definitely, there's a pretty long list of people that did us small favors, or what they probably think of as small favors, in the first year of 7-mesh. When we went from, we formed the business at the beginning of September 2013, and we launched at Eurobike a year later, so August 2014. And to get to the start line of being at the trade show with a product, there's probably 200 people that each did us a small favor. Whereas if any one of them hadn't, we wouldn't have made it. And, lead times in technical textiles and development times in apparel and stuff are much longer than people outside the industry realize. Just getting to the trade show with a line of product that was all custom designed, developed custom materials, done to our colors, our specs, prototype, fitted through sizes, men's and women's and all that, pulling that off with a small crew of people, from concept to being at the trade show in 11 months, is something we couldn't have done without support from an incredible number of people. And we owe a debt of gratitude to each of them. It was just amazing, and gave us that newfound, like, hard-learned respect for just what it takes to start a business from scratch, and so much respect for anybody that does it of any business of any nature, really.
And when starting from zero, doing an apparel business, I imagine it's quite cash intensive. Were you guys doing this off your savings?
Apparel's the worst business ever. No one should ever do it. It's the worst.
We started on our own. for various reasons, for me personally, it was really important that, I'd gone through personally, I'd spent 18 years helping to build Arcteryx. And, when I look back on it now and I think about the complex reasons why I ended up deciding that it was time for me to go, a bunch of it was about, some of it was, I wouldn't say it was territorial, but it was about a sense of responsibility and control. And, as I lost a degree of control for that business as it was becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and I didn't have my hand on the tiller for all of it. There was a feeling that, I'm responsible for this and I'm not controlling it perfectly. And so when we started SevMesh, honestly, if you believe my story so far, that I'm a CEO that had a long history at a company, that things were going really well, we were growing really fast and really profitable and becoming the darling of Amherst Sports, then you have to kind of allow that quitting and going and starting a business on the side without funding of any kind whatsoever is kind of a strange thing to do. But it was really important to us. And so we wanted to make sure that every decision we made in the early days of SevMesh, as we set the framework for what we wanted to be a 100-year brand, was decided by us. And that meant we wanted to control it all ourselves. So, we all sacrificed a lot to do that. And so, there were no paychecks going out. There was money going in and there was no paychecks going out. And there was a finite, there was a burn rate associated with how much money we had. And, we all invested up to our necks and higher, everything we had to give in terms of money and time and energy and focus, and chose that way to get the business off the ground. And so we did that knowing that couldn't last and that we didn't have deep enough pockets to fund inventory and an apparel business and all that on an ongoing basis. But we wanted to start it with that complete control over where we were going. And unfortunately, that's worked so far.
So what were the conversations that led up to the SevMesh name? How did you guys come up with that? Where did that come from? What conversations? How did you even find something like that?
We don't have to break the carpool rules here to talk about this a little bit, because the carpool deserves some credit for the origin of the name.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Calum, you want to tell a little bit about that, Calum?
Sure. So we had all carpooled through the lead up to the 2010 Olympics. So the Olympics, Vancouver and Whistler were the host cities, and Squamish is kind of the pit stop in the middle. So we all suffered through the what ultimately has been great, but the highway construction on Highway 99. So lots of mornings carpooling to work, late for meeting, following an excavator at 20 kilometers an hour down the highway. But one of the great things they did during the construction is they added the original, I guess not the original spelling, but the First Nations names of the different places along the route. And the language was never written down. It was an oral language, but there had been a bunch of work to preserve it, which involved using the kind of English alphabet to write it down. And in the if you're a linguist and you use like the true phonetic spelling of all these things, the 7 was used in a couple places kind of as punctuation. So the 7 represents like a little pause, or like a connection between two words. And so there's a number of words where you'd see a 7 in it, as these place names. And Squamish, or I'm going to say it as best I can, but like Squamish, the 7 is that little gap for the mesh. And this stood out as kind of cool and unique to us, and it made us think about the learning about the language and realizing that it had almost gone extinct and a bunch of work had been done to preserve it and all this. And so originally we thought that SevMesh was kind of a cool name for the business, thinking that it ties it back to Squamish. It's kind of a made up, it doesn't really mean anything on its own. And originally we thought, well, that'll be the company name. And we still thought that we'd be doing business as these other brand concepts that we had. But then as we kind of got more and more comfortable with it, we're like, actually SevMesh is unique, and you can get sevmesh.ca. Or so in the end, we incorporated it that way. We signed the lease on Unit 102 where we are now under the name SevMesh, and then we kept on thinking about what the brand name was going to be. Maybe TJ did most of the work on that part, so maybe you want to, or if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'd say.
What were some names you guys went?
I'm not going to tell you the name. We got to save those for the next venture. But so I can't tell you the names, but I can tell you the themes. And for me, we make a lot of jokes about our inability to form a brand or a name or that kind of thing. And We kind of joke around about the fact that, we spent 15 years explaining to people how to spell and pronounce Arcteryx, and now we're going to spend 15 years explaining people how to spell and say seven mesh. But so when we originally named the business out, like Calum said, without the intent of that being the brand, but the brand was all about, for me, it was all about this special place. And I mean that in both a physical and kind of an ethereal sense. So Squamish to me represents a coming together of cultures. It's a beautiful, unique spot. It's a spot full of adventure and the outdoors, and I enjoy all the interactions of the different people and cultures that live here. And so as we were looking from a brand, we wanted to form a unique word. We wanted to make something up. And seven mesh is not a real word in any language, but it obviously was inspired by the Coast Salish word. And we want to choose a word that reflected the place we were, but wasn't the place we were, and reflected who we were as people, but wasn't us as people, and reflected the kind of the adventure and the way things come together in this area. And we really think of Squamish that way, and also Vancouver that way. Vancouver is incredibly multicultural. And I've always believed that was a big part of the success of Arcteryx, was that it pulled best elements from different cultures and people. And you had this tremendously diverse working environment with all these cool things going on that represented that.
There have been a few brands called out for cultural appropriation. A couple I can think of off the top of my head in the cycling industry in particular. I mean, Dirty Kanza changed their name, and I remember a brand called Apache Bicycles. They were subject to severe criticism, and rightly so, about their use of First Nations naming, cultural artifacts, stereotypes, etc. in their marketing. I've seen online that seven mesh has been called out for this as well.
We think about this a lot, and our intent was good, but just because your intent is good doesn't mean you don't make a mistake too. And I think there are arguments to be made that when we named our company seven mesh, that we were appropriating a piece of First Nations culture. And I'm not sure that's the case, but I think you can certainly argue it. And we haven't had much criticism. We've had one vocal critic pop up from time to time. But other than that, people have been pretty understanding and pretty forgiving. And, I personally, I wrestle with that decision. And so before we named the brand seven mesh, we did reach out to the Squamish Nation and had some meetings set up that ultimately fell through and weren't able to get an audience to talk about whether this was an okay thing to do. And we did see it as something that was really it was about that spirit of collaboration and promotion and building something new together. We wanted to share that and didn't get a chance to. Knowing what I know now, I wouldn't have given up on that, but I would have pushed harder to get that audience and make sure that we were engaged earlier on. And, one of the things that we have learned, or I want to be really careful not to speak for Ian and Calum here and speak for myself and say, like, I'm on a personal journey and I live in Squamish. I own my house here. And when I think back now to when I first moved here, I don't think I had any knowledge that Squamish and basically all of British Columbia is unceded traditional territory of First Nations people. This is not land that was given up in treaties. This is not land that First Nations people were tricked out of. This was taken. And I mean, we are occupiers on this land, and that has been decided all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And so that's why there are negotiations in place to make things right for that we support. But it's the fact that I grew up in Canada and was not cognizant of the fact that you can step on toes this hard, and you're doing it today. Everybody in Squamish is doing that today, whether they realize, not everybody, but many people in Squamish are doing that today, whether they realize it or not, is something that's been a real learning journey. And so when we've reached out to and talked to different partners and people and helped out in little ways and built some connections that are more diverse and can help us understand these things, the message that we've gotten is it's not about mistakes in the past. It's about where are you today and how are you moving forward? And I don't mean that as a cop-out, but I will say that, I have learned more about the history of Indigenous rights and relations in Canada in the last 5 years than I learned in my last 40 years before that as a Canadian. And so we don't think that, it's not our job to be the front. It'd be wrong for us to put ourselves in front of that discussion, but we want to assist in that discussion. We want to be part of the good guys in the team that are recognizing these past and ongoing wrongs in some cases and how we can make them right. And so, overall, we feel like our name was intended respectfully and is about the celebration of cultures working together for a better future. But it's not the responsibility of people that see that to know that on our behalf. Like it's our responsibility to show that that's what our brand means to us. And so we're trying to take action in lots of positive ways to kind of to carry that forward. And that's the kind of conversations we have when we talk about it. It's like, can I say that we didn't make a mistake doing that? No, I can't. And I'm 100% comfortable with our intent, but like I said, intent doesn't always matter. And so this is something that we prefer to address really directly. And our plan there is to keep showing goodwill and keep building and to be on the side of recognizing what's happened in the past and moving forward in a really positive way. If
you changed your name, are you just like, oh, phew, I don't have to think about that anymore? Maybe it's better to keep thinking about it.
I think that's a very fair comment. It's like if we found over time or we recognize maybe we all have blind spots, and if we recognize over time that we'd done something really wrong and that involved changing our name to make it right, then I think the three of us would do that. I think that personally, I think these issues that we all face globally right now when it comes to recognizing the way different cultures interact, I super recognize that we're on the powerful side of saying, hey, can't we all just get along and move forward? One of our friends that does great work in this area told us, he said, it's like there's a wall in Canada and 95% of the population can't see it. And once you step on the other side of the wall, it's as clear as day and you can never forget that it's there. And that's kind of where I'm at in my head right now.
Yeah. Education and recognition are two huge components of that, isn't it? So you guys had a year to go to market. Basically, you had the Eurobike timeline. Is that correct? Is that what you were shooting for?
Yeah, that was the goal to launch it Eurobike.
What was the go-to-market plan? What was your range? What were the decisions behind it? What was your market? Who was your customer? All of those choices. You want to talk about how you formed that in that small of time frame and actually got up and running to show the market?
We canceled Christmas.
Yeah. Canceled everything, actually.
I mean, when we said we started from scratch, then despite kind of talking about whether to do business like this, like when we sat down at Ian's kitchen table, it was literally like, what do you want to do? What do you want to build? What does it look like? Are we doing road biking? Are we doing mountain biking? Are we doing both? Gravel didn't really exist then as a named activity.
We called it like 6 different things. We didn't know what to call it.
And but yeah, we started talking about what I can tell you strategically what we did that actually makes some sense, and then I can talk about kind of the gut feel and the intuition from there. The strategically, what we started with a relatively heavy focus on outerwear. Outerwear, protective, waterproof garments, stuff like that, are generally made from a different set of textiles and technologies than knit, stretchy, close to body type stuff, and so there's a different skill set involved. So when we kind of, it was pretty easy for us to say, hey, you know what, we're coming from the world's greatest jacket company. We know how to make outerwear, and so that's our strength. And then we went into the cycling industry where we thought, frankly, we thought a lot of the apparel was really terrible. And don't get us wrong, we're not here to put ourselves on a high horse. There's some good stuff too, but there's a lot of bad stuff. We looked and said, of the bad stuff, the worst of the worst is cycling outerwear. I mean, I'm not gonna be polite about that one. There's some really terrible products out there. So we said, hey, if we want to get noticed out of the gate, we're going to leverage our strength against the rest of the industry's weakness, and we got to put our best foot forward. And so we had a heavy outerwear focus in the first year.
And when you say outerwear, you mean like jackets?
Yeah. So we launched with 12 styles, 7 of which were jackets, and 5 of which were shorts and jerseys. So, and that's inclusive of men's and women's. So it was a small, tight line, but each piece was very different, very specific for what it was meant to do, well thought out, and kind of had a place. So it was lean but effective in terms of covering some bases.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, it was a pretty feverish process. I can remember, actually carving out the first prototype from all of our pattern blocks. And I mean, we started fresh, right? So our process it's different than, what's out there in the typical apparel industry. You're drawing pictures, you're creating measurement charts, you're sending that off to a factory, and the factory's producing a sample, and that's coming back. And that's, that's not every industry, but that's pretty typical in an outdoor industries. And so our process is really hands-on. So it was, okay, we're going to make a jacket. What's that going to look like? And so you got to create different fit blocks. You've got to create different articulation. If you want to build a jacket for ice climbing, you have to build a different articulation into the underarm. So when you lift your hand up, the hem doesn't ride up, of that particular garment. When you're cycling, completely different. You've got to put that jacket on. It's got to feel and look the right way when you stand upright in the change room, which no one does on a bike. Then you got to go into like, a riding position, and it's got to fit really well in that position. So, those are really hard challenges to overcome. Especially with these fabrics for outerwear, which are, they're fairly static. Any of the good ones, any of the really waterproof ones are static fabrics that don't have a lot of stretch involved. And so we were sort of just going, well, we know we're good at problem solving. We know we're good at patterning. We know we're really good at sort of articulation and fit. We know which fabrics are going to work and which ones aren't for our application. So we had a bit of an unfair advantage from our history, for sure, leading into it. But by no means did we bring a lot over with us. We started really fresh, and that was a really, really big push in the first not even 12 months. I guess it was really 9 months. And then once you've got that 1, 2, 3 styles going, then you got to figure out who's gonna make it, who's gonna commercialize it, who's gonna build that sample. So our philosophy has always been, let's build the perfect prototype, get that the way we want it, and then we'll find a partner to build it for us. And startup mode, man, that's pretty hard.
You guys cut patterns in your kitchen table type thing?
Well, at this point, we luckily had an office and a couple of rickety old sewing machines we bought at an auction, and then some heat presses and basic tools. And eventually, by the end of the first season, we had a seam taper, or no, I guess by halfway through our first year, we had a seam taper, and we had a couple more tools. But really, it's about craftsmanship. You can build, if you know what you're doing, you know how it's going to be industrialized in the end goal. You can almost build it with a home. You can build a Gore-Tex jacket with a home sewing machine and a home iron if you want. It's just the knowledge is way more important than the tools you actually have. So if people envision these fancy workshops with all these tools and all these things, and at the end of the day, knowledge trumps that every step of the way.
I'd like to add that, just maybe a description of what that looks like in real time, because it sounds like we had the lab up and running and everything. Everybody's wearing white lab coats and it was perfect. But what really happened is, Calum was like, "Hey guys, we got to form a company so I can sign this lease." We signed the lease. The lease on the space we signed was for one unit of a 12-unit complex that hadn't been finished yet. And the key we got from the landlord was one of the master keys that would open all of the units. We got pretty tired of trying to do this at our kitchen table pretty quickly. So we called the developer, because there wasn't a landlord yet. There was just a developer. We called the developer and said, "Hey, is it okay if we store some stuff in the unit next to ours, while we're finishing off our space?" And he said, "Sure, no problem." Well, probably enough time has gone by now that we can fess up that, within about 10 days of that, we had, we were in this giant space because they hadn't put the partition walls in yet, with no heat, in the middle of winter in Squamish, with about 10 miles of extension cords and, our full machine set up, and we were all working in giant parkas and toques and gloves. We had like 3 laptops, 4 sewing machines, 4 people, and we were just going after it. And every day was about making product in this space.
And you'd have to unplug one sewing machine to plug in the other one. Like, it was like one circuit. It was absolutely epic.
Picture making the best cycling outerwear in the world by first looking at putting a big white piece of paper on your dining room table and drawing the pattern for it. It's pretty special to see that, like, 2D to 3D transformation happening, and then you're sewing it up and putting it on, and it was super exciting.
I find it interesting how you guys define your market, and a lot of brands will start in like pitons, climbing harnesses, for example, and really narrow down on one sport, and then zoom out from there. And you guys it seemed intentional that anything on 2 wheels was more your market. And
yeah, those are some really fun dialogues that we'll talk about forever. So we had to sit there and say, well, what do we want to do? And the road versus mountain bike debate was really interesting, because we just had massive arguments about what in road biking, there's kind of we call it the uniform. Like, everybody knows what a road biker wears in the summer, and to the point that we all fight about is the sock 1 centimeter too long, and is the color game good enough, and that kind of thing. In mountain biking, it's all over the map. You get everything from downhill World Cup racers, the other end of the spectrum, people in jeans and t-shirts out cruising their local trails. So and there's very much a rejection of a norm there, if you will. So when we kind of entering all that, we thought, well, what do you do here, and what is the smart thing to do? And again, it goes back to, why are you doing this to begin with? And we're doing this because we wanted to create something that we think is super representative of what we see of this culture of Squamish and us as individuals and who we are as people. And so at the end of the day, we said, well, we all ride road bikes and we all ride mountain bikes and we all goof around on cross bikes on the logging roads and all that kind of stuff. Let's do that. And so we talked a lot about the gear we wanted. It's kind of a truism when you're designing products that if you find a product that everybody in the office wants, then you know you're onto something. And so the only way to know if you're doing that is to make products that are relevant for us as people. And so that's what we chose to do. And so it made total sense for us to address both the road and mountain bike market. But we did that knowing that the risk there was all the road bikers, we would think we were a mountain bike company, and all the mountain bikers think we were a road bike company, and nobody would be interested. And at the end of the day, there's lots of ways that shows up in our product line in terms of how we approach problem solving for each of those groups of people.
And has that turned out to be a good decision, you guys find?
We'll see, but I think it has personally. Like, I mean, the writing's not on the wall. We're still a pretty small little company, but I think what's really interesting for me was we had this, we kind of broke it into, categories of like, are you a road biker, mountain biker, cross biker at the time, gravel biker, whatever you want to call that. And what was really interesting was we broke everything down to function, which kind of comes back to our backgrounds of focusing on product and focusing on problem solving. It was about, we kind of broke it into these 7 hour, 7 day, but really that came down to like, how fast am I riding on it? Is it a cross country mountain bike thing, or is it a road biking thing? Because those are actually pretty similar. I'm moving quickly. I don't want drag. I don't want a jacket flapping in the breeze, that kind of thing. I'm worried about how much friction there is on my body when I move. So, is it taking up energy? And that kind of puts it in a natural kind of, racy category. And so we broke it into these two categories of 7 hour and 7 day. We don't talk about those externally much, but like 7 hour was like done in a day. I know exactly what I need for a specific activity. And 7 day was more versatile. And naturally, those led themselves into two different categories of like more mountain biking because it had a baggier fit, had more feature set, had the ability to breathe, over a greater variety of conditions, which now kind of falls, really well into the gravel category as well. Whereas the 7 hour stuff was like, I'm going on a very specific ride. It looks like it's going to rain. I'm going to put this on, and that kind of led us into these two camps of decision making. And again, as DJ said, we still talk about it as a high risk. Do we need to call that out as a road piece? Do we need to call that out as a mountain piece? We need to call that out now as a gravel piece. And what does that mean? And so we have some people come in, they'll come through the door and be like, oh, I love that jacket. That's my favorite mountain biking jacket. And I'm like, oh yeah, what kind of riding do you do? Oh, you're a cross country rider. And then someone will come in the next day and they'll be like, oh, that jacket, that's my favorite jacket. What kind of riding do you? Oh, I'm a road biker only. And you're like, what is going on? You could very easily have three pieces in your range to make up for this one because we didn't call it a road or a mountain or a cross jacket. We left it kind of vague intentionally. And I personally think that's one of our strongest assets, but time will tell.
I agree. And I think that the hidden story there is that it's a product decision that then becomes a major, major brand factor. So, we didn't make one road jacket and one mountain bike jacket just for the sake of saying they're road and mountain. We looked at function, and that's what being a product-based company is all about. So 7 hours is, your mission. There's less variables. You're going to have a hot shower at the end of the day, and away you go. 7 day needs a little bit more versatility. You need to be able to layer underneath it on cold days. Like, think of it as like your extended trip jacket. You're going to go to Europe and ride through the Alps for 2 weeks. What's the one jacket you're going to take with you? It needs to be a little more versatile. You want to be able to get a coffee in it. You want to be able to pick up some groceries at night. And so defining our product that way was really recognizing that what you wear on the bike is more dependent on the conditions than the type of bike you're riding in a lot of circumstances. And that gets to the difference between marketing a product for activity or marketing it from a cultural group. And we know that, some people are just pure road bikers. Some people are pure mountain bikers. Some people cross over in between. We decided to go the route of saying, hey, we're going to build, you don't have to believe us that we're the best, that we're a perfect cultural fit. You have to believe that we make the best product. And that's how we're going to build our relationship with our community.
I think it's also notable that in going after a smaller part of the market, coming in with a strong outerwear offering, 3 out of the 7 outerwear pieces were women's pieces as well.
Yeah, that was a really interesting and profound choice, I imagine, to start off with launching with a women's range. And how did you guys balance the reality of trying to get off the ground and a small market, and you guys weren't heard of yet, and being able to execute on launching with a women's range?
I think we targeted Eurobike, knowing that we didn't want to start as like a BC company and then go Canada wide, then go North America, then go to Europe. We started very broad, so kind of covering road and mountain product, men's and women's, you know, really spring and fall with the outerwear pieces, and by launching in Europe, US, and Canada all at the same time. Um, that probably was really in terms of the same minimums apply to men's and women's at the factory, regardless of whether or not your sales are going to be that equal amount. So it's probably a bad business decision. But again, kind of back to TJ's point before, it was like, well, you're not only going to make men's product. It's just the right thing to do. Is like you're obviously going to make some women's product as well. And we thought that we could make the biggest difference in women's outerwear.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a one fun story is that the first design block pattern we actually finished was our flagship women's jacket, and so I that's more symbolic than anything else in terms of like it doesn't physically affect every other product because we design each product and pattern ground up and activity specific. But for us, it was a commitment to what we wanted this company to be and we wanted it to become. And maybe in some ways it was too ambitious and maybe it's not necessarily the logical or smart call. But like Calum said, it felt like the right thing to do. We wanted to be a company that built a global. We want to be a brand that built a global community of users that were like-minded along the kind of things we treasured about riding bikes, and that includes men and women. And so why wouldn't you start with both? And the financial reality of making women's product at our size is it's pretty hard, and we're kind of we're well over invested on that size by any metric you can choose to apply, and we still don't have complete equality. We have just a few pieces in our line that we make for men that we don't make for women, and we're not quite at parity really. Um, you know, we would love to get to parity. We want to do that, and so we've bit off maybe more than we could comfortably chew at the outset, but that's the path that we want to follow to build the kind of business we want to build.
Late 2014, you guys went to Eurobike to launch Seven Mesh as a brand and your products. What was the intent and the expectation of going to Eurobike, and what did you come away with?
I think, for us, when we went to Eurobike, we really felt like that was the hub of where the cycling industry globally came together. And Interbike is quite a small trade show. Eurobike, quite a bit larger, on par with some, on par or bigger than some of the outdoor trade shows we were used to that kind of bring together a global community. And those trade shows are really exciting from a business point of view because it's not just about being there and selling products. It's also about networking, seeing raw material suppliers, seeing all your vendors, and building connections with other factories and other people that are innovating and doing cool things, and establishing those collections, those new networks that allow you to collaborate and get things done. And so it's kind of a multifaceted thing that isn't just outwardly facing, trying to sell things to the market. But we went there, we went there to kind of mark our arrival and to reach out to retailers. And so our business, maybe somewhat unusually these days, we're not building it as a purely direct to consumer business. We started with both direct to consumer and wholesale, but our focus actually was on wholesale in terms of building a global market. And that partly stems from the fact that we had limited funds and we were self-financing and we're a startup. We didn't have a big marketing budget. We just had the ability to make what we thought were great products. And we were really counting on our retailer partners to kind of, once they understood the products, to kind of introduce it to their customers for us and to tell that story for us. And so the idea behind Eurobike was to go and find those, our goal was to find, our goal was to open 100 doors globally that represented the best bike shops and best bike shops with apparel specifically in the world, and to use that as the epicenter to kind of reach out, educate people about it, and build the business from there. And so we went there specifically in mind with, hey, we need to sell some product. We need to sell this much product. And, we want to establish small partnerships with 100 great doors. And if we do that, we're going to consider it a success.
And I think we actually, I think we overachieved at Eurobike. I think we ended up with a stronger presence in Europe at the beginning than we were expecting.
What was it like with three of you standing there at Eurobike, after coming from being some of the top positions of a globally recognized, reputable company to introducing yourselves and what you're doing. And was that scary? Was that exciting? What do you remember of the time and how that felt?
It was exciting. It was unusual to be at your booth in like the back corner of the last hall, as opposed to the Arcteryx booth. At big shows commands a bit of a central presence.
Yeah.
So we were just right on the edge of where brands kind of turned into fabric vendors and chamois vendors and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think the cool part was that a lot of people had made the effort to come find us.
Mm.
And a lot of people we talked to were like, "Oh yeah, I would never have come back down to the end of D6 or whatever, but I talked to a buddy of mine from here, and he said I should come check it out." So it was really, I think it was a big confidence boost. It was great.
Yeah, I was gonna say it wasn't 3 by then. I think it was 6 actually. Our first show. Shout
Oh
out
yeah, Conroy
to
was there too. Yeah.
shout out to Conroy Noctegal, Bobby Howell, Brian Goldstone, and team of 6 that you felt like had been through battles together just to get to that point. And it was just an incredible sense of camaraderie and joy. And frankly, like we were really proud when we launched our first product line. We thought we were bringing something that it wasn't like, hey, we want to be in the bike business. It was like, hey, man, somebody needs to make better stuff and get it out there. And we were on our way. And so even though it was just a starting point, it was tremendously rewarding to be there and to feel like at that point you'd created something from scratch. Like whether you succeeded or failed, Mesh was a company and it was a brand and it was out there trying to sell things. And that, I think that satisfied the kind of, if not the creative in all of us, then at least the maker philosophy that we'd all grown up in business, and that maker philosophy we had in wanting to build something from scratch of this business. We were there doing it.
It was actually kind of funny because we earlier in the year we had built we obviously built our salesman samples and samples that we're going to use for the trade show. We built those obviously at our factory, and then we weren't happy with our shorts, so we actually just scrapped them all, and we actually started from scratch very late in the process. So Conroy and myself and Cindy, who was actually on board at the time as well, stayed up late and basically sewed samples for the trade show. And then Conroy, we went over, set up the trade show booth. Conroy stayed behind and rode in the samples for a bunch of long rides to make sure they were good to go. Like not every pair, but one pair, obviously. And then he met us over in Germany, and then we had those samples that we sewed in the booth. And I remember one woman came up and she's just like, "I really like your product. I like how you're thinking about it, the articulation, and the way you guys have addressed the chamois problems with the zigzag stitching and blah blah blah." She's like, "But these just look they're just a little unfinished." And I looked at her. I'm like, "I'm really sorry. I sewed these at like midnight the night before we flew here, so I'm really sorry." And she just laughed. She's like, "What?" And I like didn't get it at all. I completely missed the point. But that's the kind of thing we were doing to try to get the product that we want it to be just the way we wanted it.
What was the trajectory of the company then? Was it just like gung ho, we're building? Was it all smooth sailing, or describe how the next couple of years were in the growth of the business?
No, I'd say, man, how to answer that question in a way that aren't going to get Calum and Ian interrupting me one sentence in. It was hard. I mean, it was a bit of a roller coaster ride in terms of things that went right and things that went wrong along that journey.
Because you were in a pretty flat market at that time, weren't you?
Yeah, we went into it. It's, a flat market, when you're a micro size like we are, there's enough room for a little guy to squeeze in there and take a little piece. And so we were in there, but the kind of path to growth relied on really convincing people that we were viable partners. And that's mostly because we were focused on the wholesale side. So one thing that is good about our prior experience is that, for the most part, we do know what a good job looks like from a retailer's point of view. And I'm not saying that we always get it right, but we're always looking at our business through the lens of like, we've been in a business that grew from, 0 to big, and we knew how we had to satisfy our partners along the way and what good partnership looked like at different scales of that business. And so we understand the kind of metrics that buyers care about, and we understand, how important delivery is, and we understand, fulfillment and predictability and not surprising people and collaborating on storytelling and all that. And so the next couple of years was really a story of us trying to get better at that. And we definitely took a lot of shortcuts to get to that start line in terms of everything was about building the product and getting the samples ready and getting to the trade show. Once we were past that major make or break milestone, it became about, okay, what is the right cadence to develop these different areas of our business with limited resources? And when do you focus on product, and when do you layer in marketing, and what can you do to support your retailers? And so I would say the next 3 years, was kind of, steady but volatile. We stayed really quite small. We hit our sales goals for the first year, and then we stayed kind of small after that. We had some definite hiccups in terms, we had fantastic delivery the first year. We had some hiccups in some other seasons. We launched with product that we were super proud of, but even as we launched it, we knew that we had so much further to go and can make it so much better. So still a very heavy product ideation phase. And so the stress of getting the launch was gone, but the stress of getting the business off the ground was still there. And we the way I always characterize people was like, okay, as far as 7Mesh being a business go, the plane left the runway at Eurobike, or you can say when we delivered our first products or whatever. But we were still trying to desperately pull up because we hadn't cleared the trees at the end of the runway yet. And that's what I think the 2 to 3 years after that felt like was, we need to gain altitude here because there's a lot of things to crash into. And if it's not a tree, it's a power line. And if it's not a power line, it's a cliff. And it's not a cliff, it's a mountain. And so there was a lot of heavy lifting to get through that.
Did you guys feel like you were winging it at all? Like, you have experience in all of this, but obviously the new challenges and all that present themselves. Did you guys have a pretty clear idea of what you needed to do? Or was this just new challenges after new challenges thrown at you that is like, wow, there's no playbook for this that we've seen? How did it feel?
Yeah, I think we understood. I think what our experience gave us is it gave us an understanding of the landscape. And I can't remember who said it to me once, but somebody once said to me, "Oh, well, you guys have all that experience from Arcteryx, so you're not going to make any of those mistakes this time." And I was like, "Well, that's true, but that just freshens us up to make an entirely new set of mistakes," which is basically what we proceeded to do. So, in terms of building the business and having a playbook, both the thrill and the challenge of it is by far some of the hardest planning and predicting we'd ever done. It's like, hey, Calum, let's do our sales forecast for year one. How many red ones do you think we're going to sell? How many blue ones do you think we're going to sell? Like, there's no data to draw from. There's no extrapolation. There's no inferring this. There's no patterns to model your next plan off of. Everything is done from scratch. And so it was like paint. It was the difference between coloring a coloring book and painting on a blank canvas. And painting on the blank canvas was way more exciting, but it's way more difficult to feel like you're ticking the right boxes and that you're proceeding in the right direction along the way. And there's a lot of gut feel, and there's a lot of intuition, and there's a lot of soul searching, oscillating between soul searching and gaining confidence. And I think that period reflected a lot of learning for us of how 7Mesh needed to evolve as both a business and a brand to be relevant enough to be worthy to stick around.
So the journey is not finished. It's kind of just begun, in terms of being a 100-year brand. Where do you guys see yourselves in, say, 5 years, that short to medium term?
Yeah, from a brand point of view, we're still, we're in the danger zone. We talk about scalability and setting up things right so that the company's able to grow. So we have like I said, we kind of understand somewhat retailers look for in partners. We have a good ERP system, tracking our data, and we know how to manufacture products, and we work with great factories, and we have certain things that are now scalable, like we can grow that. And we have other things that we have to learn and figure out. But because we're taking the time to set those things up right, and we've been patient while it's happening, we've stretched our resources pretty thin. We're in year 7 and we're still a very small brand. Year 5 on the market. But we're getting traction and we're making real progress, and that feels great. And so, at 5 years on the market, I'm running out of time. I keep calling us a post startup because we're not a startup, we're a post startup, but we're still in the danger zone. And so, in the next 5 years, it's pretty clear opportunity for us to fly the plane over the mountains and get a view of the beautiful earth below. And what we want to do is be able to keep pushing just as hard on the things that need to be pushed. The product side of things, the storytelling, we want to do more enabling of adventures out there. There's lots of projects that we give a little bit of support to. We'd like to give a lot of support to. There's lots of cool things to be done in the world. We'd like to be able to do those. And, speaking for me personally, I'd like to be able to do those feeling like I have a little bit less at risk and that things are a little bit more established. And we're not far from that. But I think it's worth pointing out that we're not there yet. And we have, we still have some heavy lifting to do ahead of us.
I'm Wade Wallace, and thanks for listening to another episode of Overnight Success. If you have suggestions on a remarkable entrepreneurial story within the cycling industry, hit me up on our members Discord channel where I'd love to hear about it. Until next time, stay inspired and stay tuned for our next episode.